IMGL Masterclass, a European regulatory update. Let's take a high-level approach to understanding the changing dynamics of iGaming law. Moderated by Justin Franssen, Kalff, Katz and Franssen. Mancini, Quirino, SCM Lawyers. Maria MacDonald, Nordic Gambling. Joerg Hofmann, Melchers. Andrew Cotton, INCE.
Thank you so much for welcoming us. And this is the IMGL Masterclass at SiGMA 2019. For those of you who are not familiar with IMGL, it stands for International Masters of Gaming Law. That's a non-profit association of leading gaming legal experts and advisors across more than 45 countries in the world and 33 states and territories in the United States. We do these masterclasses as a format where we provide speakers and topics to leading game shows and exhibitions worldwide. Now we're here in Malta, we're back on Malta. Thanks for the invitation, thanks for the cooperation with WH Partners. My name is Joerg Hofmann. I'm a German gaming lawyer, partner with Melchers law firm in Germany, and I have the pleasure to moderate this panel today, and I'm happy to introduce my panelists. Next to me, you find Justin Franssen, partner with Kalff, Katz, Franssen in Amsterdam, Netherlands. He's also currently serving as the secretary of IMGL. Maria MacDonald, partner with Nordic Gambling in Stockholm, Sweden. Quirino Mancini, partner with Tanucci Lawyers in Rome. They're currently serving as first vice president of IMGL. And Andrew Cotton, sorry, I wanted to say Jerry Cotton, that's someone else. Andrew Cotton is with INCE in London, also all of us long-standing IMGL members. We will be focusing on a very, very specific topic in terms of regulation, which is developments in the regulation of gambling advertising. It's a very timely topic, extremely important, and we identify a lot of extremely important developments across various jurisdictions in various jurisdictions across Europe. We start to discuss this. I can tell you, one of my sons is studying marketing management in Germany. He knows how important it is to provide proper advertising for services and products to create a level of transparency and information. I think this young man is way ahead of the thoughts of some regulators and some politicians in some states who obviously did not understand how important it is to provide advertising for gaming products and services as well, and not to be too restrictive. We are talking about full advertising bans, as it is the case currently in Italy. So I think it's just logic to start with Quirino and touch on the Italian situation. Quirino, the total advertising ban for gaming products is in place, but there is some room for reconsideration, and there's first experiences. Please, if you'd like to introduce the situation to the audience.
Thank you, Joerg. Good morning. Yes, it is fully in place. It's been in place since last year, July last year, and it's badly affecting, obviously, the operations of particularly, I would say exclusively, the online gaming, the pure online gaming operators. I say exclusively because those who are hybrid operators, who are also on the ground, or those who are only on the ground, are not affected. They can continue to keep their signing outside the shops. So people will always know where to find their daily shot of highly addictive drugs. It is so much in force that actually approximately a month ago, we had the first enforcement case which affected an Italian licensed operator who was fined 50,000 euros, which is the minimum, the entry level of a fine. And of course, it's not good news for the operator in question, but it might be good news in terms of revisiting the rules, because we need to be very clear. There is not one thin chance that the decree as is, the decree carrying the real money blanket advertising ban, can be revisited as a result of a political action. It will not happen. It will not happen as long and as far the populist five-star movement is in the power room, because they are the ones who actually initiated this. And even let alone the five-star movement, I would say that there is not enough consensus in the parliament to revisit the ban. Gambling is very nobody really wants to touch gambling other than to introduce new taxes. And alongside that, we need to bear in mind that they are already enforcing it. So the reason why I say that this might be relatively good news is that finally, hopefully, rather than finally, the fine will be challenged before a court, and hopefully someone who has a bit more familiarity with laws and regulations, which is the judges versus the politicians, will review this ban and possibly reshape it, or even possibly send it before the Constitutional Court, which cannot be done by a private citizen. It always has to go by a judge who receives a complaint and then assesses whether there are any inconstitutionality grounds. But in principle, that is the case, because as I was saying before, we have this situation where a pure remote gaming operator at the moment in Italy, no matter the license, how many licenses they carry, they cannot just advertise in any possible way, including sponsorships. But if you have a foot on the ground, if you have a shop or two or a network, then you are allowed to keep your signs outside the shop, and from that platform, sell the online platform services. So there are some, I would say there is some intrinsic discrimination, and I would hope that, by packaging the complaint the right way, this will end up also before the Constitutional Court.
In how far is the industry suffering from that internet ban? If you compare the market approach 2019, 2018 backwards, are there any figures or any trends?
In terms of
the impact of the ban?
Oh, the impact has been, I would say, dramatic. You have to bear in mind that we are in a, I would say, a surreal situation, whereas the regulator is, in these days, issuing licenses, fresh licenses, online gaming licenses. And those poor guys who are getting the piece of paper after a wait of more than 18 months, because the applications were filed in March 2018, before the advertising ban, without knowing what was in the pipeline. Again, nobody was anticipating back then, because otherwise I'm sure we would have already, we as lawyers, we would have already long since changed business and practice, because nobody would have applied for a license knowing what was coming.
Sure.
Anyway, now that they have finally been issued the license, they are not in a position to let the market know that they exist, that they are now licensed in Italy, because they cannot advertise. So the consequences of that are tragic. And this, without mentioning the shortfall of estimated in the region of 100 million euros, which was associated to all the sponsorship deals that were fetching much needed money to the professional sports, football in particular.
Yeah.
So the bill is quite
big losses.
High.
Yeah. Maria, that's interesting. Sweden, the gaming regulation in Sweden is pretty young. You could call it emerging. So the discussions, the parliament, among regulators, politicians, they will be looking, those who lead these discussions will be looking at Italy. Are they trying to fall in love with that sort of internet ban or with restrictions of advertising regulation? I know there has been a consultation among the minister and shareholders, stakeholders of the industry. Could you give us some insight, please?
So, yes, as you mentioned, we have a very new regulation in Sweden, and I'm sure many of you in the audience know that the market opened from 1st of January. But actually, even before then, there was a requirement for marketing to be made in moderation, and that was kept in the new Gambling Act as well. Now, I don't know your opinion on this, but my experience is that this industry's strong side is maybe not moderation, and it was very much so in marketing in Sweden beginning of this year as well. Whether private or state monopolies, there has been a lot of advertising. We're in a competitive industry, and everyone wanted to position themselves. So there was massive advertising. I mean, 5 out of 7 in a commercial slot on TV were for gambling companies. And this has made both people, the general public, but also the responsible minister react. So he is calling for action. And he did so very early in the year, which resulted in an attempt from the 2 trade bodies for gambling in Sweden, BUS and SPER, to come together and try to self-regulate. So they have, in my opinion, a very ambitious program on what can and cannot be done in terms of advertising in order to keep within the limits of moderation. But of course, the minister was not satisfied. So he has now added to an already ongoing investigation on how our Gambling Act can be developed, added new directives. So he wants this investigator inquiry to look into whether we can have a total advertising ban in Sweden, like in Italy. We're looking on, or how can we limit certain products? How can we limit times on television and other forums? How can we limit exposure to young? So this report is coming out in October next year. We're not looking at something happening tomorrow, but within a couple of years, I believe that we are going to see more restrictions in Sweden, unless the industry comes up with even more restrictive measures itself.
Right, so hard to predict. While we are sitting here right now at the moment, the politicians, the parliament in the Netherlands is debating new gambling regulation. And they also discuss advertising and possible restrictions. Justin, I saw you wearing earphones a minute ago before we stepped on here. Following that parliamentary debate, what's the current state of play?
Yes, well, actually, I wish I still had my earbuds in. It was a very interesting discussion, which will be ongoing until about 1 o'clock today. Let me start by saying that on the 15th of November, the minister wrote a letter to Parliament in response, inter alia, to the motion van Dijk. And the motion van Dijk passed the Senate on the 19th of February when the bill, the remote gaming bill, passed into an act. And the senators basically asked to review or to have a look at a complete ban for online gambling, let's say Italy style. The Minister of Justice then commissioned a report, an investigation report, with 2 institutes, Regulus Partners and the University of Amsterdam. University of Amsterdam looked at, for instance, other advertising restrictions in other areas, such as alcohol, tobacco, and so forth. Looked at the viability from a national and European law perspective, whether it could be done in the first place. Regulus did research in other member states, such as Italy, such as Belgium. But the overarching conclusion, luckily, was, well, we probably shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't go down the route of a full advertising ban. For the exact reason indicated by Quirino just a minute ago. And luckily, just less than 45 minutes ago, the minister restated this position in front of Parliament. He basically says, well, how can we essentially give out licenses and then have these operators not tell the world they're there? How can you possibly channel our Dutch players to the future regulated market? We saw some pushback on that. I mean, some parties are pushing for a watershed which should go to 9 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock, which is the current situation. But the minister is standing ground, or at least 45 minutes ago he was standing ground, which is great news, I think. But we obviously, in the next coming days, we may see motions on a number of topics. And one motion could be to nevertheless have more stricter application of advertising restrictions. But so far, good news, I would say.
Sounds good. What do you think, when can we expect some more clarity on this? The timeline?
Yeah, in the weeks to come, as many of you probably know, the regulatory process once again has been delayed. This was also announced in the letter of the minister on the 15th of November. We're now looking at the implementation of the legislation on the 1st of January 2021, with the first licenses to go live at the summer of 2021. And one of the main debates, which is also ongoing right now actually, is the hotly contested 24-month cooling off period. So those operators who have been grey market operators or have been illegally on the market, they should be in a way punished, at least that's the feeling of the Senate. And you essentially have to demonstrate 24 months in the run-up to your license application that you've been a good boy. So no ideal, no Dutch language, no .nl extension and so forth. And whilst the minister in his letter and also in the debate today seems to be standing, still supports that concept, it's not to be excluded that due to pressure of incumbent interests and also interest at the level of the lower house, especially the Christian Democrats, we may see some pushback on that. And I wouldn't be surprised if a motion will be filed along the lines of, well, this 24-month cooling off period should be extended, or maybe we should even go back to the concept of a full blackout as was introduced in 2011.
Thank you. I think Professor, a good point raised to move over to United Kingdom. Gaming is part of the culture of your country, but we see some changes how the regulator and the Standard Advertising Authority approaches gaming operations and its advertising. Andrew, please give us some insight. Huge fines being imposed, and the industry is trying to react.
I think the industry has been suffering, obviously, over the last 12 months because I think we've had 4 gambling ministers because of the political mess we've been in. So there has been no sort of governmental direction on this. But what's really interesting is that all 3 main political parties have said there needs to be gambling legislation to bring the 2005 Act up to date. So it's clear we're going to see something. Now, there have been various calls from government ministers for the industry to self-regulate, which they've responded to. But one of the problems we have is that the enforcement is done by the Advertising Standards Authority, and they don't, at their own volition, necessarily initiate the enforcement action. So parents of children who've been able to access things file complaints. And so a lot of the inconsistent decisions that there have been, there was one last week where a bus company had adverts for a new set of gambling premises on the back of bus tickets, and actually the ASA didn't uphold that as exposing minors to gambling. Whereas there have been quite a string of cases about cartoon characters. There was the press really are now gunning for the online industry. Now the sort of fixed odds betting terminal debate is over. And there was a Sunday Times investigation a couple of years ago into the prevalence of cartoon characters on gambling sites, which led to a letter being issued by the advertising enforcement authorities, the Gambling Commission, and the Remote Gambling Association. reinforcing that those must not be used. So there has been a big drive to self-regulation, and of course that's led from the 1st of August the introduction of the whistle-to-whistle advertising ban on live sports, and that runs from 5 minutes before the whistle at the beginning of football rugby match to 5 minutes after the end. So half-time and any extra time.
And that's by way of self-regulation?
Yes. So this is, well, it's social responsibility code to comply with the industry code for socially responsible advertising, and the industry drew up those provisions, knowing that if they didn't, then there was likely to be much tougher action taken. What's interesting is certain sports, it applies for a whole day. For example, cricket matches, golf tournaments. So that's from 5 minutes before the first ball is bowled, or 5 minutes before the first tee off, until 5 minutes after the end.
Really interesting to be monitored. Maria, let's focus a little bit, for last minute, maybe on Denmark.
Yep.
There was an interesting discussion. The industry tried to respond by way of code of conduct, and politicians are advocating in favor of more restrictions. But then all of a sudden, the antitrust authority blocked these developments. What's it about?
Yes, so it's very unfortunate, and that the antitrust authority has considered or thinking about considering this self-regulation to be a cooperation that isn't allowed under competitive law. I know that in Sweden, when the trade associations sat and spoke to, or the different operators sat and spoke about the code in Sweden, they had a competition lawyer raising his hand every time he thought they went anywhere near something that could be considered as not okay. And I think that must have, as far as I understand it, he didn't have to raise his hands at all. But it's a good way to show that it's possible to self-regulate. Of course it is. A lot of businesses do. But having said that, unfortunately in Denmark, we are now also talking about a complete advertising ban. They're not happy if you self-regulate, they're not happy if you don't. It's a bit of a limbo. Where do we go from here? I spoke to my colleague, who's a Danish attorney, Henrik Norsk Hofmann, and he says he thinks it's up to 80% risk that there will be a total advertising ban in Denmark. So these things are spreading. Maybe the industry should discuss these matters on an international cross-border level. Could be very helpful. Yes, I think so. We have 30 seconds left. I use these seconds to tell you about Germany. We're not considering a total advertising ban at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised if this idea would come up. Currently, German legislation or German interstate treaty regulation is subject to significant changes. The prime ministers are going to debate some drafts of a follow-up regulation, which will come into force probably in July 2021, and it's totally unpredictable what they consider. It's about including online gaming casino, but maybe as a monopoly solution, maybe much restricted. This will be decided within the next couple of weeks, and before that, everything else is not serious speaking about the outlook of what's going on in Germany. So this will be interesting at the beginning of the year to look back at the German market. So 30 minutes are over. I think we touched our jurisdictions and those important developments in respect to advertising, of gambling. Thanks for your attention, and thanks, my panelists, for your contribution.